Welcome to the Innovation Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Innovacer, the data platform that accelerates innovation in healthcare. We're on a mission to connect and curate the world's healthcare information to make it accessible and useful. Accelerate innovation, digital transformation, and your success with population health, customer relationship management, and value-based care with Innovacer. Visit us online at innovacer.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the Innovation Accelerator podcast. I'm Rich Levin, and I'll be your host for today's program. Today, we'll be taking a look back at HIMSS23. What were the hot topics on the show floor? What were the questions we were fielding at Innovacer's booth? What were the 6 new innovations that Innovacer unveiled at HIMSS23? Joining me on today's show are Innovacer's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. David Nace, our Chief Innovation Officer, Dr. Anil Jain, and our Chief Technology Officer, Mike Sutton. So let's take a look back at HIMSS23. And as always, if you have any comments, questions, or would like us to address a specific topic on the Innovation Accelerator podcast, feel free to write to me directly, rich.levin@innovacer.com. That's rich.levin@innovacer.com, where you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm Rich Levin on LinkedIn, and feel free to send me an email. All right, well, let's go to the panel and take a look back at HIMSS23. You know, the HIMSS is in the rearview mirror. What were the top trends that you saw at the show? What were the top topics of conversation? What were people asking us about when they came to our booth? Anyone can take that.
Well, I'll start. Obviously AI was all the buzz because, ChatGPT has been in the news big time for the 2 months prior to coming to him. So everybody just wanted to talk about that. In fact, it's sort of a vendor issue. I think every booth said they did AI. So it also was a bit of hype too. And I think people recognize that. But what was interesting is there's a strong recognition that we've suddenly got a more user-friendly form of AI that can do really a phenomenal amount of at least generative AI, right? Being able to link to all the different aspects of information on the internet and being able to pull it together in a blink of an eye and be able to put it together in a way that one asks. But it's also recognized that there are many errors in that. But the cool thing is people are brainstorming on applications of where they might use that.
Yeah, and I would just add
any thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just add to what David is saying. I think absolutely the number one theme out there, no matter where you went, was generative AI. It was everywhere, and even folks who weren't doing generative AI were calling it generative AI or GPT because that they knew that's what would get their attention, what would get folks' attention. I think every year there's a different theme, and in some years it's just regular AI, and some years it's pop health, and some years it's data and interoperability. We still saw some of that, right? But for sure, the generative AI was a big theme. Folks that came to our booth and asked us what we were doing, just to David's point, they asked us about what we were doing in AI. They asked us what we were doing to help bring down the burden that clinicians were facing, what we were doing around health equity, doubling down on what we were doing because we had been so well known for it in the past, what we were doing around platforms and cybersecurity. It's just, they're expecting more from us each and every year. And I think we did a very good job of explaining where our investments are taking us. But by far, generative AI and AI, we did release a conversational AI product at HIMSS. So there were questions about that. And we do have a generative AI project underway. So there were questions about that. But I think when I look back at HIMSS, with the 35,000 folks that were there and all the, especially when it's in one of my favorite cities and where our all the folks that came to HIMSS actually learned why Chicago is called the Windy City based on the weather we all experienced over there. But I think one of the most profound things was that the basics still matter to people. What are we doing to improve the value-based care experience among all the different customers, and how are we doing it by lowering the burden for clinicians? If AI happens to be it, great, but they still want to know the basics.
Mike, any comments?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's kind of staying on the AI theme. I think everybody sees kind of the generative AI and its place in kind of the user interface and certainly documentation on those. But I had a number of very good conversations with, granted, a little bit more of the engineering, cadre of folks and data scientists on really how the AI techniques can be used in data wrangling, data manipulation. If you're a student of the large language models that are going out now, it actually creates and has the ability to share and build common ontology, which hasn't happened before. Right now, that's a very manual process in the data wrangling business. So I think there's a lot of, I guess probably what I'm saying, this is the tip of the iceberg. I think all this, the UI stuff is super interesting, super valuable, very much like the browser brought to the internet. It's given us, like Dr. Nace mentioned, it's given us access. But I think the ramifications of what this is going to do for us to mix data and unify data and normalize data, we haven't even seen it yet. But I think that is going to be probably some of the bigger savings, and to the point of making language interpretation a simple call of a AI module that we can do our business in multiple different languages to include clinical language. So it's going to be very interesting. A lot of discussion with folks in that space at HIMSS. So.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say the one thing I would add to that is, one common issue around all of this buzz around AI, particularly generative AI, it really all depends on a training set of high quality data. And that's something that we've kind of cut our teeth on creating, is a high quality set of data. So I think it's something that we can be pretty proud of and can give us a leg up as we move forward and trying to understand how to use these new applications, these new technologies.
Yeah, and one additional thing that we need to watch out for, and by no means am I a naysayer when it comes to generative AI. Absolutely not. I'm a big believer that this is going to be revolutionary. But if you think about the comment that David just made, that it's the training data that will make this all very important. Healthcare, especially for folks like myself, who I'm a primary care doctor when I practice, is that you're looking for the patients who don't fit the pattern. Folks who perhaps are sicker than what they might appear to be. And so it's all about outliers. And I do worry that we get caught up in the ability to look at patterns, and that we miss out on the fact that medicine is not just only about patterns, but it's about experience. It's about the healing touch. It's about the way that patients might be experiencing things. So what I wouldn't want us to do, and I certainly did see some of this being discussed at HIMSS, I wouldn't want us to think that somehow GPT is going to be, or generative AI is going to be the panacea for all those folks out there who aren't getting good primary care. I think we do need to make sure that we don't get ahead of ourselves. The training data sets are important. Well, we all know that the biases in the training data can get propagated if we're not careful. And it goes right back to the health equity conversations that we previously have had. So I love the idea of GPT and generative AI. I like what I saw at HIMSS, but I did hear conversations that worry me a little bit around how are we going to make sure we don't step in something that we're not ready to step into, which is training up generative AI on data that might already contain biases, and all we're going to do is propagate them. And to Mike's point, the large language models, I wish I had a whole bunch of docs in my practice that all spoke the exact same language. It would make life a lot easier. But I'm really impressed by what I saw so far from GPT, especially if you look at the work that the group out of Stanford is doing, looking at how accurate it is. But when I hear things like 90%, a lot of us probably wouldn't want to go see doctors or go use a tool that's only 90% accurate. But I think it's a great start.
So is there a need for, you look at interoperability as an analog to this, and eventually we came up in the industry, HL7 appeared as a consortium, FHIR appeared. we're still not there yet. Interoperability is still a big challenge. There's more data fragmentation than ever. Look at the retail entrants coming into the field and bringing a whole bunch of new silos. Is there going to be a need in a similar manner for some sort of standardization around AI as we move forward in healthcare specifically? And also, I guess related to that, again, if you look at interoperability, we're not, are we there yet? We're not there yet, right? And in some ways, maybe it's overhyped. The excitement that we're having, HIMSS happened right after ChatGPT 3.5 created this explosion. So we're at the very beginning of this sort of hype bubble. How much of this do you think we're setting overly optimistic expectations, and are standards needed, or is a consortium needed?
Well, I'll be really brief because I really like to hear what Mike and David have to say on this, because I'm probably going to be one of the outliers in terms of my comments. I don't believe that we should be thinking that somehow regulations are an answer to a problem that might be much more complex than we'd like to think. We want to leave the room open for innovation, and so as much as driving standards helps the next innovator, great. But putting too much regulations in the way is just an overburdening tax on the next innovator. And what we'd like to do is create an industry that polices itself. If we're going to have standards and then let the marketplace sort of dictate who may be solving that particular customer's problems and doing it in a way that's ethical, that's responsible, and that's accountable. But we have a challenge with regulations, which means that the folks who regulate need to understand this stuff. And I'm not convinced, given how complex this is, that the regulators will ever be one step ahead of those who innovate on this. So my sense of it is, yes, let's create standards, but be very careful in imposing regulations.
Yeah, and I agree with Neil completely. I don't think, and I use the word specifications rather than regulations, but we don't need another fire spec. Fire's perfect. I mean, well, that's an overstatement. It's slowing.
Can I quote you on that, Mike? Can I quote you on that?
Yeah, please tell ONC that I believe it is good, but we don't need more detail than that. I think if we were to focus more on what you were mentioning, Neil, is things like, how do you describe the quality of data? How do you describe the quality of a training set? How do you describe the efficiency of an algorithm or an ontology to describe a particular language? I think we need, and I don't think those are, regulations. I think those are kind of best practices that are going to evolve. Like a lot of, what we've all built out in our quality dashboards, because we've been assessing the quality of data for, 5-6 years now. I think as we start getting into describing the different patterns of data and the advanced mathematics that these AI routines use, I think we can have standards in that particular area that can give us more confidence in the data that's going into those algorithms that end up being, through a GPT type thing. But to me, in the data business and the wrangling business, it's standards around quality, I think, is going to be, what is a good training set? Is this effective or not? And I don't think that's a spec. I think that's best practices that certainly are going to evolve. And to your earlier point, I don't think we as an industry even know what all those things are yet, because all of that's moving at a super high rate. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that piece.
Yeah, it's interesting what's been brought up, which is the idea that interoperability, standards versus innovation, right? So it's a balance around standards and innovation. It's similar to, as a clinician, the way I think about cost and quality, right? So if you fix costs, then you really stifle, right, a lot of the quality changes that can be made and the innovations that can be made. And if you fix a quality threshold above, then you put constraints around what it'll cost. So it's finding that intersection and finding out how to improve that intersection. I think it's, how do you find the intersection between standards that allow things to be working together and yet still allow for innovation to allow things to change and evolve. Obviously, there are certain things that a standard is required for, like quality of a data set. So the idea is, where are the areas that we need standards? Where are the areas that we don't overly restrict and constrain innovation by creating standards for everything? Then you just fix the world the way it is today.
Yeah, and Rich, I would just add that perhaps the question that we should be asking ourselves is not whether AI should be regulated or have regulations in the medical space. Maybe there is a space for it if you look at software as a medical device, for example. But what I would ask is, wherever there already have existing regulations, have they been updated to reflect the use of AI and the use of generative AI? So if you're billing for an office visit, or you're creating a decision support mechanism, do existing regulations account for the use of this? And would the adoption of generative AI be somehow curtailed if the regulations didn't catch up? But I wouldn't regulate AI, or I wouldn't put regulations around the use of AI GPT. I would go back and look at all the existing regulations and try to revamp those or revise those to reflect the realities that we're all going to be assisted by some form of AI or another in the future.
So clearly AI was one of the big trends. Some of the other trends I've heard from folks who were at the show, tell me if this is what you heard, and feel free to insert something different. But I heard the retailization of healthcare was a big topic. I heard that the financial pressures on providers and the need for immediate value from new IT solutions was a topic. And as I mentioned earlier, interoperability still being a big challenge. And I don't know, HIMSS has always struck me as the sort of the EHR/interoperability show, every year. That is, a hot topic, and it's still not solved. And then I heard another hot topic was the smart hospitals trend. And honestly, I'm not even sure I know what that means. So I wonder, were these also big themes that you heard at the event? And if not, what were the alternative themes that you were spending most of your conversation time around?
Well, I'll kind of go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
So I have an alternative, Rich, to kind of that.
Yeah.
It was kind of doing retrospective from the prior HIMSS, maybe not as much last year's HIMSS, but pre-COVID HIMSS. I was really pleasantly surprised that a lot of the conversations I was having was, like 3-4 years ago, the conversation, well, what is a data lake? Well, why do I need it? How is that different than a data warehouse? And do I need a data strategy? Where, as opposed to this HIMSS, the conversations were much more around implementation. I think people are practicing this, whether they've kind of built out some of their own environments as, perhaps experimentation. Maybe they tried a solution that didn't get them to where they wanted to go. But there was a lot more what I would consider of substantive conversations around implementations and doing, which again, as little bit 3 or 4 years ago, it was much more conceptual and philosophical. To the point where I spent a lot of time with a couple folks, I'm going to go back to my favorite topic, fire, is, building fire, smart on fire apps. I mean, it's happening, and there's still some implementation issues but the discussion is around implementation and not philosophy. So I was really pleasantly surprised that the predominance of the conversations were much more sophisticated in the detail as opposed to, 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know if anybody else saw that.
No, I would agree. I think there's a definite push to make things more real. Everyone is more cost conscious, worried about ROI, worried about implementation, adoption. I think there's definitely a greater push. I think one of the themes, going back to your question, Rich, that I noticed was there were a lot more folks, not just at the booth, but if you look at the titles of the education sessions, patients want more from their health systems, period. They want care at their own pace, their own place. They want care on their own time. That's where the whole retail clinics concept comes from. There's still a demand for asynchronous visits and telehealth visits. patients want more from their health systems. And the whole concept of CRM, even things that we're investing in with CRM, kind of allude to that. But just as patients want more from their health systems, docs want more from their health systems. Clinicians want more. They're tired of doing the low value work that other folks can do. And so there's a theme of a lot of folks who were sort of promising that they can help reduce some of that burden. And we're certainly tackling some of that too. But I think patients want more, docs want more, and I don't want to say all roads lead back to AI, but all roads might lead back to AI, because patients do expect that those retail clinics, those virtual visits, you see all these direct-to-consumer health apps popping up, many of them showcased at HIMSS. You see clinicians wanting as much help from AI as possible, without foregoing the revenue, by the way. They want the same revenue, but they want more help. So that was a common theme, Rich, which is, hey, we're not happy with how care is being rendered, and we're not happy with the tools that clinicians use. So you guys step up. The technology industry needs to step up and solve some of these thornier issues that, frankly, we've been sort of behind other industries around.
So what I'm struck by over the past 4 years is how closely related the experience at HIMSS is with what we've been through as a country, as a world, with pandemic. So, and the overall context of the movements around healthcare expensive, the creation of value in healthcare. So we've had this trend now for nearly 100 years, of moving from a more paternalistic approach to what, the role of a physician is, the role of healthcare is. The patient does what the physician tells them to do, and that's the way it is, to this move to more patient-centeredness, right? And this move to more what we would say is sort of a consumer expectation. Things should revolve around what the patient wants in terms of wellness and health. Pandemic accelerated a lot of that in a number of different ways. One is we all learned that we could actually do things from home, like we're having a Zoom chat right now. We learned that we could practice medicine from afar. And so a couple things happened there. We all bought things from Amazon. And I have to say, I ordered a set of Band-Aids last night that I needed today. I ordered it at 12:30, right after midnight. I woke up, I went downstairs at 7 o'clock. It was already sitting on the doorstep. Like, I paid an extra $2 to get that. So from a consumer perspective, is that what I get from healthcare experience? No. I call to get a cardiology appointment. I might get it a year from now after I spend an hour on the phone waiting through queues and calls. And on the other side, they're looking at things in databases. So there's a tremendous expectation of consumers that revved up. And we're seeing that play out in terms of what's expected. We also saw patients stopped going to their health systems, the brick and mortar health systems, the hospitals, the walls, particularly for elective work, and they didn't come back in the way they used to. And the workers didn't come back in the way they used to, because they found that they could work remotely. And the health systems, as a result, are really teetering in many cases, if not most, on the brink of financial challenges, if not collapse. So we're starting to see things play out around, how can I help with my staffing? How can I help with the feeling of burnout? Because I'm now working from home in addition to working in the office. And the consumers are expecting much more, and that's placing additional pressures on the health system in general. There's a tremendous need for technology to rise to the occasion to help assist the people that work in healthcare to address all these issues. And I was hearing these themes revolve around what the purchaser wanted to do. And our timeframes around value are changing too. So I think it was already said once in this call, the people that were coming around that have an intent to use money in their system to help address some of the problems are expecting much shorter returns and when they get results from that expenditure than in the past. So it's interesting how this has been so intertwined with the experience of the pandemic and the changes that have occurred as a result of that over the past 4 years.
You bring up a great point, David. I was just going to say, you bring up a great point, because if you think about all the things that have happened in the past year, since companies had to plan their booths, pick their booths, and the consolidation that's happened in the tech industry, you can just walk around and see all the changes that have happened in the past year for those companies that have sort of rolled back or perhaps not even shown up. to HIMSS. But that's a really interesting observation in terms of HIMSS. I'd like to think that it's much more real time, but I mean that healthcare in general is, but HIMSS is a good microcosm of what's happened in the last year or so.
So
and
weaving together,
vendors can sell things now virtually too. Remember the old days when vendors would have to fly someplace, stay overnight, go meet with whoever the pitch for 2 hours, and then fly back 3 days out of pocket? Now it's an hour on a Zoom call. So that's changed too, and I think it's affected, to your point, the way people show up.
well, people could even test some of these products online, without any implementation requirement at all. And not to be self-serving here, but by the time this podcast is released, we will have unveiled our SDOH Explorer. It's a SaaS application. You just log in and you're in. You've got access to the data, and then you can take that data and integrate it with other systems. So, I think the movement to, I'll call it on-demand healthcare computing, is increasing. And I think certainly Innovacer is at the forefront of that. But talking about the data center and the cloud, based on what the major EHR vendors were showing, what's your take on the state of the EHR? And let's include its impact on physician burnout. I know if Dr. Silverstein was here, he would have something to say about that. And he's written a white paper about it. Anybody listening can hit our resource center and you can find that white paper. Just type in EHR or burnout. But what's your take on the state of the EHR? I mean, this HIMSS, if I'm not mistaken, this event started around the birth of the EHR, right? It was the EHR show years and years ago. So what's your take on what you saw? What's the state of the EHR and the EHR in the cloud, EHR on premise? Where are they going? Lots of legacy code in those EHRs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Rich, I'll take a stab at this first. HIMSS predates EHRs in the modern sense. And I think in many ways, HIMSS started because there was a massive health information management challenge that CIOs and folks that supported the CIO were dealing with, everything from lab systems to the scattered systems. When I started practicing medicine, we had paper charts. We had VT100 terminals for a lab system. We had a different VT100 terminal for the microbiology system. The passwords to these terminals was basically pasted underneath the keyboard. There was pre-HIPAA days, and so I think HIMSS was really bringing together a cottage industry of all the different technology vendors, everything from the folks who would wire, terminals to the lab systems, to the printers, to all that. So I like to think that EHRs were not the focus for HIMSS until later, and then EHRs sort of really took off after the stimulus bill sort of gave money to the doctors and hospitals to bring them on. But you asked a really good question. What is the state of EHRs and what does it really mean for burnout? So let me be the first to say on this conversation that I don't think EHRs by definition are the cause of burnout. I think poorly designed EHRs, poorly designed workflows, taking autonomy away from the clinicians, getting them to focus on low value work that is beneath their licensure. Those are all the causes of burnout. EHRs are a necessity. I don't want to log into 10 different systems to find out what's happening to a patient. So having all that information being brought to a centralized place and having some minimum standards for how docs and hospitals should choose an electronic health record system, I think is essential. Because you don't want to buy a system and have it be obsolete in 2 weeks. Or worse, you don't want to buy a system and have all that data be locked away. These current requirements for EHRs give people who practice some level of certainty that if they make an investment today, it's gonna not be for naught. But burnout and EHRs, in my opinion, should not be in the same phrase. EHRs don't cause burnout. The lack of training, the lack of design and various workflows is what causes it. And I think what Innovacer does is masterful. We plug in some of the gaps and holes that health systems have with taking advantage of their massive investments in EHRs. We're talking about some cases $500 million or more. And so we should be very careful, because without the EHR, it's the wild, wild west when it comes to information. And I'd love to get Mike and David on this, because I want to be very clear. There is no doctor I know, none, that would ever go back to practicing without an EHR. Now, would we all want the EHR to be better designed? Yes. Would we all want Innovacer bringing an overlay out so that we have a assistant that's watching over what we do? Absolutely. But no one that I know would ever want to practice without an EHR. So let me turn over to Mike and David and get their perspectives on that.
You want to go, David? I can't speak much to physician burnout, of course, but I do want to take on the cloud on-premise discussion. But you want to go first, David? You have anything on the burnout issue?
It's not on burnout per se, although it's related. It has to do with the EHR question asked. So the EHR, this came about as part of the stimulus. This answers is illustrative of the issue about standards versus innovation, right? So we had this stimulus bill, a lot of money being paid to adopt. Standards were written. I was in the room in the ONC when they were starting to set these standards, but we set standards for a world that existed in place at that time. So the idea was, how do you capture digital record in a fee-for-service 1999 world of delivering healthcare? And what backfired is we solidified, right, the financial streams into that model. And so I don't want to go back to practicing without EHR. In the old days, I would have to go down to medical records, request the chart. After a while, I'd get it. I'd bring it upstairs. It was huge. I'd have to read handwritten notes by somebody I couldn't read their writing. So I don't want to go back to that. And besides, now I can record the data and anybody has access to it with privileges to access it. And it saves a lot of time. But it's built for a model because of the standards that were put into place. Right. And so there's been tweaks and additional applications built around it as well. And there's an evolution of standard setting, which is delayed way behind. Government is always way behind the innovation that occurs in the industry. But I will quote, since it was publicly said at Becker's the week before HIMSS, and this will be curious, Mike, with your experience as a CTO and CIO in healthcare. Sarah Vaezi, from Providence, on the stage talking about consumerism, made the statement, the EHR was built for a dying business. So it is a system of record that was built for a business that is dying. Provocative statement. I didn't make it. Sarah made it. I understood what she was referring to. So, Mike, how do we move forward?
Well, I do. I mean, I think what both you, David, and Dr. Jane just said is we essentially did the paving of cow paths for a business that was, as you mentioned, was in 1999, and the EMRs, and God bless them, they're a fantastic record system, but they're built for clinical billing in a business model that is decades and decades old. So how do we move? Changing transaction systems is not easy, but I'll go back to my time in the travel business. The entire travel, I think we could all understand and agree that the travel industry transformed itself at the turn of the century. Well, their transaction systems, the Sabres of the world, the GDSs of the world, the Apollo, they didn't change. I was at the cruise line and we had a system that was built in 1982 on code that nobody knew anymore. And we turned that by taking the data out of that transactional environment and putting it in a customer, I'll use CRM also, although the term's not my favorite, but into a CRM or a system of engagement so people can interact with it. You still put your billing in that system, but now the primary interaction and the logic of the new business model moved outside of that the accounting system. I'll never forget when our senior VP of marketing said, you mean I have to publish all my prices are going to be available on the internet? And I said, yes. And guess what? They have to be the same everywhere. And so that was a huge change in the travel business. And I think we've all seen it. To me, and what I've done from just a personal perspective, if I've used that kind of knowledge and experience and translated in this business, is when we start making the data transparent, so people in the healthcare space, we're going to be able, I don't know what the model will evolve to, but very clever people are going to find a way to evolve the model to meet the consumer's needs and to bring down those costs. Because right now, people don't know what those costs are. So to me, it's that transformation from a billing transactional environment into an engagement environment.
Yeah, I really like the model that Shubham Singhal put forth, McKinsey, in a paper about 2 years ago, where it talks about, you have to have this infrastructure, technology infrastructure, whether it's cloud or on-site, whatever. And all businesses today have to have that. And then there's a system of record. The EHR is a great clinical system of record, but you also have business systems of record, registration systems, lots of records for the business. You have to do it if you're going to run a business. You're subject to regulatory environment and you want to keep records so you don't get sued and you can keep track of your business. But then on top of that, there's the ability to take a look at everything you do and to start using analytics to make decisions, to perform better, to deliver better products and services, to deliver care better. And we call that analytics. And that's been a broken environment, right? With lots of different tools and applications and poor quality data. And then that all the experiences of all the people that interact with the system, whether they're employees or financial managers or patients, they're all in that user experience, right? That's on top of all of that. And with all of that analytics and data being broken or poor quality, it just creates awful experiences that are not connected, not efficient. And that's the piece I think here at Innovacer we've been trying to solve. And it's a constant theme coming out of the pandemic of what needs to be addressed from an innovation standpoint. So I'm pretty hopeful and excited about the future. I like what I'm hearing at HIMSS. I think we're now going to see more virtual communities form, not just HIMSS. And we have the pop-up of Vive and HLTH and now competing with HIMSS and Chime moving from one to the other. So we'll see where all this goes. But I think it's pretty exciting. Are we approaching Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point? I believe we're kind of heading pretty close.
So what were some of the new things that you were most excited about seeing at HIMSS? We talked about AI and generative AI and large language models. Innovacer introduced 6 new solutions. One of them was a conversational AI assistant called Sarah, where you can just ask it a question and get an answer out of your data, and not wait a week for the data team to send you back your report. Health equity, readmission predict, risk AI, network optimizer, and our enterprise CRM. I'm sure we think so. Some of the things we're most excited about. So, but in general, what were some of the new things that you were most excited about seeing at HIMSS? And I guess we could include AI in that as well. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
I was going to say, Anil, these are your babies' products, so go for it.
Yeah, no, look, in addition to the products you mentioned, Rich, and we're really proud of what we're doing in that space. I think looking around in terms of what was interesting that we saw at HIMSS, or that I saw at HIMSS, I think a lot of it had to do with some basic block and tackle that, as a clinician, I would love to see. And Innovacer certainly is investing in this space, but we have to recognize that the patients of the future aren't going to be seen in the brick and mortar exam rooms of the future for a vast majority of conditions. The 50% of primary care can be done asynchronously through surveying the patient and asking questions and then just responding to them. And so what I was really excited about seeing was some of the advances in remote patient monitoring, advances that I saw at HIMSS around virtual care and some of the emerging models. We're never going to go back to the levels of telehealth that we saw during the height of the pandemic. We know that. But there is a class of problems, medical problems, in which patients are going to expect to be cared for, as we mentioned earlier, asynchronously or through a virtual visit or a telehealth visit with their provider, and they don't have to leave work. They don't have to leave school. They can very quickly get taken care of. So I saw some very interesting vendors who were putting products out that served many of these things. Now, what was missing, and where, again, I get excited about what we're doing at Innovacer, is what was missing was a platform backbone, and having to recreate the data fabric each and every single time. So I think RPM, virtual care, some of the advances that are being made on the what we were saying earlier about the EHR adjacencies, all the modules and capabilities that make the EHR more usable for the wide variety of business models that practitioners are dealing with now, they all require some fundamental backbone. And that's what's exciting, because they're all looking for something that can help glue the legacy EHR systems to the emerging innovations that these folks are doing. So that was exciting. And when folks came by our booth, partners came by our booth, that's what they were asking us about. Can you help us solve this fundamental problem around not just interop, but integration back to the electronic health record? And we're fortunate. We've got a Smart on Fire app that integrates with Epic. We've got a Epic App Market presence in the system. So yes, the EHR is suboptimal, and yes, it's not fitting today's business models, but thank God we can, and we are able to then produce some of those overlays. And so a lot of what I saw were companies doing really cool things that needed a big brother or a big sister to help them connect the dots into the overall workflow. So I'll pause there and get some other reactions. But I was incredibly excited about the progress being made on RPM and virtual care. I mean, the hospital at home, 50% of the visits in primary care, they're not going to happen in the hospital or in the exam room. And we need tools for that.
Or Mike and David answer, you mentioned overlays a couple of times, and I just want to put a fine point on that, because I was talking to the CIO of a major pediatric health system, a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned to me that one of the reasons that he chose Innovacer, among several, was that we integrated into the EHR's clinical workflow. Those are his exact words. He said, if we don't do that, the physicians will not use the solution. They're not going to jump to another portal. They're not going, and he was pretty clear that a lot of the other solutions he was looking at were standalone solutions. You had to go somewhere else to get the information that you needed. And that's what you're talking about, right? And Dr. Jane, when you say...
I am absolutely. Look, technical interoperability is relatively easy. Exchanging bits and bytes and making sure that I'm getting the bits and bytes to the right place these days, it's table stakes. Even semantic interoperability, as difficult as it is getting a little bit easier. We haven't solved it yet, but it's getting easier. Workflow interoperability. Trying to inject the right information at the right time to the right person in a workflow is where we are focused on, so that we make the user's experience as optimal as possible. Now, it's not not trying to say that we've got a panacea, but we've got a pretty good approach at integrating into the workflow. Being EHR agnostic, obviously we do it much better with some EHRs than others, but EHR agnostic is exactly, I think, the reason why your colleague made that comment that he did. There are lots of point solutions out there, but if you're looking for adoption and value creation, it has to be an integrated approach.
So I just wanted to clarify that what the meaning was of overlay, because there's a lot of power packed in that 3-syllable word. Mike, David, you want to pick it up?
I'll just kind of add, you were asking kind of what the favorite development was. I'm really, really high on Sarah. In the tech world, that's called query understanding. But if we can close the gap, because it's quite the analytic system in a large enterprise is quite large. There's thousands or tens of thousands of people involved in a somewhat ineffective practice. A business leader has a desire for some information, so they talk to a business analyst, who then figures out, perhaps talks to a data scientist, who then talks to the IT people to procure data that may or may not be the right data they're looking for to answer a question that by the time it's gotten to them, they're not sure what it is anymore. And so the discipline of this query understanding that end user can ask a question to the system, which, first of all, that's a miracle right then and there. They don't need to understand SQL. They don't need to have particular technical understanding. They just need to have permission. But ask that question. And then for the tool, in this case, Sarah comes back and says, ask clarifying questions on, well, did you mean PM, for the year, or PM for the month, or what? And you can refine that. Now, we're just beginning. I'm not claiming that this is going to, kind of close that entire gap, but the ability to move that to, and it could be the clinician asking the question or the business leader of the enterprise, getting that closer to them to answer their question quicker. It requires high quality data. It requires the routines and the natural language understanding of what's being asked for, and perhaps some perception of what they are really asking for, because they rarely ask a question on exactly what they mean. So I think it's the tip of the iceberg, but I think that's going to have dramatic effects. And I would kind of say at our recent customer offsite with many of our most innovative customers, that was probably one of their bigger ones, because it takes a direct load off of them and their staffing levels, to support all these analytic requirements. So personally, that's my personal favorite. They're all fabulous. They're all great. They're all coming, but Sarah's my personal favorite.
Yeah, I have to say, I ask internet questions, Google questions all the time on my smartphone, right? So I just pick it up, hit the little microphone, and I ask questions. I can dive and get all kinds of answers. I'd love to be able to do that with my data, which is why I'm so excited about Ask Sarah, and just be able to ask the kinds of questions I need to know and get real-time, accurate, up-to-date answers on the kinds of things I need to run my business. Like, that's huge. I think also the idea of risk prediction. So I remember 25 years ago, there was all this big explosion. I was at a conference. These companies were developing risk models. Well, in hindsight, they weren't really predicting risk about an individual patient. They were looking at cohorts, right? To talk about relative risk around that population. But our ability to think going forward, what is the risk of an individual with all the things that we begin to know about them? Their social, environmental, economic issues, their clinical issues, the way they interact, that's huge. So I'm really excited about just simply our go forward risk prediction model for readmissions. That's really exciting. The ability to build networks on the fly and understand my networks in real time with real time data and be able to model that out to understand how I'm thinking about networks. Those are, I'm going to triple dip here. Those are three of my favorites.
See, Rich, I can't pick the favorites because all six are under my purview. You got to be very careful. I don't want to pick any winners and losers, but I
love those babies. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Those are definitely there. And I'll tell you, Rich, I think when you look at, especially the way that Mike and David explained this, I want to double down on what Mike said. This is the tip of the iceberg. These are our what we would call in our product world minimally viable product features at this point. There's a lot we are going to be doing with these things that at some point in the near future, some of this will become, the lines will blur as we start to use individual risk to look at what we might be doing with a conversational AI agent. And then that combined with some of the work we're doing on GPT, some of this will blur and you'll have new value that will be created for the users.
Well, and I was speaking to Amy Stevens in our organization. I was interviewing her around an article we're developing around our enterprise CRM, which brings traditional CRM data and population health data together to create something bigger than the both of them. And I made the statement about how it's the first time that this is being done. And she corrected me. She says, "Oh, no, we've been doing this forever, except that we've been asking the data team to get us specific data from the system about a given population. And then a month later, we get a spreadsheet. And then we're trying to sort of merge the things together, and it's a big, hairy mess." And that kind of gets back to what you were talking about, Mike, with Sarah, in terms of reducing the burden on the data team. But also, I don't know if I should use the word automation. It's really just bringing together these two universes to create perhaps a new universe where you get a really holistic picture of that individual, of that consumer, who then becomes a patient, and you're able to provide a truly personalized care journey. That, you said something to me 2 years ago, Dr. Nace, when we were looking at this, and you said healthcare is unlike any other retail experience because it is so deeply personal. And Amazon is not as deeply personal as that bump you might have on your head, which is going to keep you up at night. And so, I'm just wondering what perhaps some of your views are on what we're doing in the enterprise CRM space, bringing these universes together, bringing population health management. By the way, you don't have to be in an at-risk model to benefit from this, right? This can benefit you if you're in a fee-for-service model. It can benefit you if you're an ACO. It can benefit you if you're in some sort of at-risk value-based care model, in different ways, understanding the population that you're dealing with beyond just sort of the transactional details.
I mean, there's a fundamental.
How did I do there?
I think you're close. You're close, very close, Rich. I mean, there's a fundamental belief that people have that if they're going to call their hospital, they're going to call their doctor, that their doctor in their hospital knows them, that they know something about them. And I think for the longest time, when you're not a patient and you're just a member of a community who's reaching out, there's a very mechanical relationship that exists. And I think part of what we're trying to do with CRM is to try to create a level of clinical infusion. If we know something about an individual, why not serve it up in a compliant, ethical way to those who need that information to do the best job they can for an individual who might need a service? And if we know that person prefers to be texted instead of a phone call, why not let people know that? If the person prefers a telehealth visit instead of a face-to-face brick and mortar visit, why not let people know that? So I think what I see, and this is going to sound a little heretical, what I see with the way we're approaching CRM is, let's go back to the basics. Why not take advantage of what we know so that we have the greatest chance of impacting the life of someone who needs us, who needs that health system? And so what we're helping the health systems do is the right care or the right person at the right time when an individual reaches out. And you mentioned care journeys and the patient's journey. So I'll just say that we need to stop thinking about the journey starting when someone gets sick. The journey starts when they happen to be part of a community and they just need to know how to stay healthy and keep healthy. They need to know when it's time to be screened for a disease long before they're ever diagnosed with it. And so the other part of our approach to CRM and why I think it intersects with value-based care so beautifully is that if we do the right things for the community members as they engage with their local health systems, then we automatically bring down the total cost of care for a population. We automatically improve the quality of care. We improve the way that those individuals see the role of their health system. So I'd like to think that what we're doing with CRM and tying it to a clinically meaningful lens is what every single consumer in the US would want their local health systems to be able to do, which is, hey, get to know me, tell me what services you can help me with, and make it easy for me to go get them. And reach out to me in a way that I want to be reached out to. And I think it's just so basic. And it's a really exciting time for us to be investing in this space.
And like Arby's says, we got the beef. In our case, we've got the data, right? That's the missing piece in a lot of these initial CRM implementations.
It's about, I think, not just the data, but it's about knowing when that data is telling you something that is critical for us to be thinking about that individual. And then David mentioned this earlier, Mike mentioned this earlier. Once you put that data into a place where we can start to marry it up with other data, and we start to bring in data that the health system may not have, understanding what drives and motivates individuals. Bring that data together, you all of a sudden have a much bigger impact on the health of a community than you would do just by waiting for them to call up when they've got a medical problem and things of that sort. So yeah, it's about the data, but it's also about what you do with that data and what data you connect it with in order to draw out new insights.
Yeah, I would add to that, part of our secret sauce in building out the data platform we have over the past 7-8 years has been the idea of a unified patient record, right? Bringing in all these different data systems with data sources within the health system and creating a unification of all that information to really do some analytics on top of tee up analytic insights, put them into people's workflows. If we broaden that from a consumer perspective, I would say we're creating a unified person store, right? We're creating a unified person record, which includes information about them, about the way they spend money, about the way they buy food, about lots of information about people so that when they engage, we know everything there is about them, which is what they expect. People want to know that you know them and understand them. And that's the key. And then being able to help them through their journey. And we all know from the social determinants of health, that journey is not going to be in the four walls of the hospital. And the things that are going to impact it the most are outside of that. Their ability to engage with their family members, their community members, their ability to buy healthy food, the ability to exercise and be able to have trusted, sources of information about how to get to where they need to get to, whether it's through a videotape or a hospital at home or going to visit to a doctor's office. So, all that stuff needs to be coordinated and centralized from a unified record. So that's the piece I think that we have built out that can continue to innovate and expand upon to really do this, what we're calling for now, the value-based CRM approach to helping navigate the experience and value created within a system and a journey of healthcare.
Mike, any final thoughts on the enterprise CRM?
Well, the interesting part of it and kind of the good part about going last as an industry is the technologies are there. I mean, the financial industry understands me. The travel industry, hospitality industry understands me. So the groundwork's been laid for us. We just need to figure out how to take advantage of it. Consumer behavior is well documented, and there are people. I used to kid. The marketing people at the cruise line is they could get me to press any button on that website. I mean, they knew how to influence behavior. And I'm sitting here with two doctors, and I guarantee you they will tell you the game we're in with value-based care is how do we influence behavior to have people live a healthier life and keep them out of the hospital system and health system. So to me, there's just a natural alliance. If we can learn from these consumer folks, how can we move on how to influence behavior? To me, that's that plus, understanding the clinical situation and what someone needs to do next, which is what value-based care is all about. It's a perfect marriage. And, we have all the tools in our hands. We just need to make it happen.
Final question for you, gentlemen, and then I'll release you from the pain. What are some of the things that you were disappointed about not seeing at HIMSS23?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think with as much as we have made a push for diversity in health tech and health IT, I think we need to do a much better job as an industry of creating inclusion and diversity. If you look around, even the HIMSS booths that were focused on diversity were not center and front and center. It was off hidden somewhere else. I mean, I think we have an opportunity. If we're going to be about health equity and diversity and inclusion, let's make sure that HIMSS represents that as best they can. So I would have loved to seen that more. I would have loved to seen every person who was exhibiting have a focus on health equity as well. As we get more and more into the tech world, we got to make sure that we don't leave people behind from a digital health divide, if you will. And I would have loved to see that a little bit more of that. But I think inclusion and diversity is where my eyes went and where my brain went when I looked around the floor. But I think that's one. If I had to pick something that I was disappointed by, otherwise, for me, HIMSS is like going to a candy store.
Dr. Nace.
Oh, I want to go last. I'm waiting for Mike.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
I can't say I was too disappointed at all. Perhaps a little more exposure from the regulators, perhaps, and some of the states, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions there, but I don't think there's a big deal. As I will say, as we get more and more into the consumer business, the state privacy regulations are different than HIPAA. And so it would have been nice to have more, and maybe they were there. The show was so big, but I would have liked to have some places where I could have gone to and get some of my questions answered from, directly from the horse's mouth, whether it's, for a state privacy regulation or CMS or ONC. So, but I think Anil had a great answer. So.
I think for me, what I would have liked to have seen was more of collaboration amongst the different vendors that are at the table. Certainly we, as a data platform, had a lot of our vendor partners at exhibiting with us. I thought that was great about how do we all work together. I often use the word in healthcare that all ships must rise, because all ships will rise because there's so much work to do. And instead of everybody saying they are the AI platform of the future, I'd rather see more collaboration amongst vendors, because I think those who collaborate will end up rising quicker together than we will separately.
That is all the time we have for today, and I'd like to thank you all for your time. Dr. David Nace, Chief Medical Officer at Innovacer, Mike Sutton, Chief Technology Officer at Innovacer, and Dr. Anil Jain, Chief Innovation Officer at Innovacer. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to share your HIMSS23 experiences. And for our listeners, please don't forget to check the show notes for links to resources and contact information related to today's show. And stay tuned to the Innovation Accelerator podcast for more shows covering the healthcare IT topics you care about. For more information, please visit innovacer.com. I'm Rich Levin, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, gentlemen.
You've been listening to the Innovation Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Innovacer, the data platform that accelerates innovation in healthcare. Don't forget to check the show notes for links to related resources and other information. And stay tuned to the Innovation Accelerator podcast for more programs about the healthcare IT topics you care about. Accelerate innovation, digital transformation, and your success with population health, customer relationship management, and value-based care with Innovacer. For more information, please visit innovacer.com.